Hello, and welcome to another video Dvar Torah. It's been a very busy week at Beth Radom, and when I say at Beth Radom, I guess I'm really saying it's been a busy week for me at home. If you haven't seen it yet, I encourage you to watch the 4-minute video message that we released earlier this week about our exciting plans for an incredibly innovative, socially distanced high holiday experience that, with the music you love, with the people that you've been missing, and the same prayers in our machzor that move our hearts, it promises to be the absolute next best thing to being with us in person. We certainly hope you'll be joining us for an especially meaningful high holiday season. But, speaking of long-winded high holiday sermons, this week's parsha is Devarim. It kicks off the final book of the Torah, and as sermons go, this is one of the biggest doozies of them all, because this sermon lasted 3 weeks long. It takes up the entire book of Devarim. But we do have to indulge Moses this one last time, because after this speech, both his mission and his life will be over. The Israelites have finished their 40 years of wandering, and they are on the banks of the Jordan River, ready to cross over into the land that will soon become the Kingdom of Israel. But when they do, they will be led by Joshua, not Moses. Moses, as we remember, must account for his one transgression against God when he struck the rock to bring forth water, as opposed to what God had instructed, which was just to speak to it. For this, Moses will not cross over the river with the Israelites, but at the ripe old age of 120, Moses will die in the wilderness on Mount Nebo, but not before at least watching from afar as the Israelites safely cross to the other side. As with any good sermon, this one has a lot of instructions, some reminiscing, some beautiful theological and philosophical ideas, and of course some exciting drama, but we will save some of that for another video. Today, I'd like to focus on one important idea that Moses communicates at the end of this parsha, which is the first segment of his long speech. It's an idea that has been claimed by many people from different cultures and different religions over many generations, but from our modern perspective causes us to be a bit disturbed. When the Israelites cross the river, they will be going to war against the local kingdoms in their campaign to conquer the land for their own. When they do, Moses reminds the Israelites, Lo tiraum ki Adonai Elohechem hu hanilcham lachem. Do not fear them, for this is the Lord your it is the Lord your God who is fighting for you. This phrase, or at least this idea, has been used as a war cry for thousands of years and to justify many great atrocities, but with one important distinction. We understand to a great extent that when we feel that our fight is just, we want to believe that God is fighting on our side. But upon closer inspection of this particular verse, we see that the Torah clearly states that God is fighting for us, not with us. Now, it may seem like an inconsequential distinction, but the Hebrew word the Torah uses, lachem, is most accurately translated as for you, as in instead of you. And when we consider this and read the verse again, it means something completely different, and perhaps even more problematic. Do not fear them, for it is the Lord your God who is fighting for you, as in, you just sit back and relax. God is doing it for you. In 1973, Egypt and Syria launched a joint surprise attack on Israel, which sparked what we call today the Yom Kippur War, so called because the attack began on Yom Kippur. A deliberate strategy by the Arab coalition who imagined fighting Israelis weakened by the fast, but who were, of course, met instead with a fully functional and enraged IDF that quickly defeated both armies on both fronts. But it might not have turned out that way had an ultra-right-wing voice within the Israeli Knesset been given more consideration. This voice counseled the Knesset not to mobilize the IDF on Yom Kippur, as it would be a violation of Torah. Rather, they should instead trust that on Yom Kippur of all days, God would surely fight for them. We would like to mock this approach, but to do so would seem to mean mocking the Torah itself. But then how do we read this verse in a meaningful way? Rabbi Bradley Shavit Artson of the Ziegler School posits that Moses is playing a bit of a mind game with the Israelites, helping to mentally condition them to be resilient to life's impediments. We do this sort of trick on ourselves all the time, like if we've been preparing for a big presentation or studying for a big exam. We've been working and preparing for weeks, and then in that moment before the exam begins, we tell ourselves the work is already over. Whatever happens next will simply reflect the work we've already done, but of course that will depend on what questions are on the exam, or whether we trip over our own shoelace as we stand up to begin the presentation. Some might call it fate, but one Jewish approach might be to say, the rest is up to God. But actually, I think that the Torah's message goes even deeper than this. The first pulpit position that I ever served after graduating was the New North London Synagogue in London, England. Now, if any of my New North Londoners are watching this video, hello, I miss you all. During my time there, I did a lot of singing with a lot of absolutely adorable kids who are probably in their 20s by now. But I remember a fair number of them coming to me at some point saying that they couldn't be in a choir because they couldn't sing. Now, there are certainly a lot of different people out there with varying different degrees of singing abilities. But some of these kids I knew definitely could sing. I knew because I heard them singing along in shul all the time. When I asked why they thought they couldn't, the answer was almost always because a teacher, when they were really little, once told them so, and they believed it ever since. Every time I heard this answer, my heart broke. Because of one comment by one teacher years ago, a child has been deprived of the joy of singing. I find it amazing how these kinds of ideas can get into our heads when we're young, or even when we're not that young. But they still weasel their way into our minds and change the way we think and feel about ourselves. They can even alter our personalities in a big way. In modern education theory, we learn to be extremely careful about labeling students in any way, particularly those students who are regularly misbehaving and causing disruptions. We know that when disciplining students, we tell them that their behavior was bad, but not that they are bad. We make that important distinction because we can easily see how a child who is repeatedly told they are bad comes to believe it. And when the child believes it, they become justified in continuing to demonstrate bad behavior because it is now a part of who they are. When we consider the Israelite people having just completed 40 years wandering in the desert, we can understand their need to believe that the hard part was over, that they had just finished studying for the exam and the rest was in God's hands. I don't think for a moment that this idea was intended to convey that God would be doing all of the fighting for them. The Israelites were already battle-hardened. They already knew what war would be like. But they needed to be able to believe in themselves that all of their suffering had been for the purpose of preparing them for this moment. There is a reason we refer to Moses in Hebrew as Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses our teacher, and not Moses the conqueror. Instead of being the teacher, that told his student that they couldn't sing. He was the teacher who told his student, who always thought he was a slave, that he actually was God's chosen. When we read the verse, "Do not fear them, for it is the Lord your God who is fighting for you," let's not read it as a commandment to believe in God. Judaism has plenty of those. Let us instead read it as a commandment to believe in ourselves, that we are worth having God fight for us. That way, we can enjoy a lifetime of singing. Shabbat Shalom.